Cole Mercer's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips as he watched Hannah Carter glide through the grand ballroom doors, her emerald silk gown catching the chandelier light like liquid fire, her arm gracefully intertwined with none other than Damien Cross, the one man who had the power to destroy everything Cole had built. The Peninsula Hotel's grand ballroom buzzed with the kind of energy only obscene wealth could generate. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, while servers in crisp white uniforms navigated between clusters of the city's elite. This was Cole Mercer's night, his pharmaceutical company's annual VIP gala, where million-dollar deals were sealed with handshakes and champagne toasts. Cole adjusted his platinum cufflinks, surveying his kingdom with the satisfaction of a man who had clawed his way to the top. At 35, he commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents, his reputation built on ruthless efficiency and an almost supernatural ability to identify weaknesses in both business ventures and people. Tonight's guest list read like a who's who of power brokers, senators, tech moguls, oil executives, and foreign investors whose combined net worth could fund small countries. Magnificent turnout. Cole, Senator Patricia Hayes commented, her diamond earrings catching the light as she gestured toward the crowd. You've outdone yourself this year. Cole's smile was practiced perfection. Only the best for our partners, Senator. Speaking of which, I trust you've had a chance to review our proposal for the Southeast Asian expansion. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Webb, a tech billionaire whose cryptocurrency empire had made him the youngest person on Forbes' top 10 list. Webb's laugh was loud enough to draw attention from nearby conversations. Cole, you magnificent bastard. Webb clapped him on the shoulder with the familiarity of someone who'd made millions alongside him. I was just telling the Yamamoto delegation about that story you shared last month, the one about your ex-girlfriend and the charity dinner disaster. Cole's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a predatory gleam entering his dark eyes. The charity dinner, one of Hannah's more spectacular failures during their 3-year relationship. She'd accidentally spilled wine on the mayor's wife, then spent the rest of the evening apologizing so profusely that she'd missed the entire auction portion of the event. Ah yes, Hannah, Cole said, his voice carrying just enough volume to draw the attention of the surrounding group. Poor girl never quite grasped the nuances of our world. Webb leaned in conspiratorially. Tell them about the time she tried to order a vegetarian meal at that steakhouse in Tokyo. The memory brought a cruel smile to Cole's lips. Hannah had been mortified when the chef had come out personally to explain why her request was impossible, her face burning red while his Japanese business partners exchanged amused glances. She'd barely spoken for the rest of the trip. The girl had good intentions, Cole began, his tone carrying the patronizing warmth of someone discussing a beloved but dim-witted pet. But she never understood that good intentions don't translate. In rooms like this, you need steel in your spine, not just sweetness in your heart. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, one of the city's most prominent surgeons and a potential investor in Cole's new medical device venture, raised an eyebrow. Sounds like she dodged a bullet, honestly. The comment earned a few chuckles from the women in the group, but Cole pressed on, sensing an opportunity to entertain his audience. After all, these people thrived on gossip and power plays, and Hannah's social missteps during their relationship had become legendary among his circle. Don't get me wrong, Hannah had her charms, Cole continued, swirling his champagne thoughtfully. She was loyal to a fault, always ready with a home-cooked meal and a sympathetic ear. But when it came to the big leagues, he shook his head with mock sadness. She was like bringing a butter knife to a sword fight. The circle round Cole had grown larger, drawn by the magnetic pull of wealth gossiping about weakness. Investment banker Richard Stoltz had joined them, along with tech entrepreneur Lisa Chang and oil heiress Valentina Rossi. The combination of alcohol, success, and the intoxicating power of collective judgment had transformed Cole's casual reminiscence into full-scale character assassination. The real tragedy, Cole continued, warming to his theme, was watching her try so hard to fit into a world she simply wasn't built for. Remember that merger celebration in Dubai, Webb? Webb's grin was wicked. The one where she spent the entire evening talking to the catering staff instead of the clients. Exactly. Cole's laugh held no warmth. I'm trying to close a $40 million pharmaceutical distribution deal with Prince Rashid's consortium, and my girlfriend is in the corner, discussing recipe modifications with the head chef. When the prince asked where she was, I had to tell him she was networking in the kitchen. The group erupted in laughter, the sound sharp and cutting in the opulent space. Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable, but Richard Stoltz was practically doubled. Over, that's nothing. Cole pressed on, emboldened by their reaction. She once spent an entire board meeting dinner asking our Japanese partners about their grandchildren. Instead of discussing the biotech acquisition, they'd flown 12 hours to negotiate. Sweet, absolutely, sophisticated enough for international business, not even close. Valentina Rossi, whose family oil empire spanned for continents, leaned forward with predatory interest. What finally ended things between you two? Cole's expression grew thoughtful, as if he were choosing his words carefully. In reality, he was savoring the moment. The truth was that Hannah had left him after discovering his affair with his marketing director. But that version of events didn't serve his narrative. Hannah ultimately realized she was out of her depth. He said smoothly, 3 years of trying to keep up with this lifestyle wore her down. She was always anxious at events like this, always worried she'd say the wrong thing or embarrass herself. Eventually, she admitted she couldn't handle the pressure of dating someone at my level. The lie came so easily that Cole almost believed it himself. He'd perfected this version of events over the past 6 months, reshaping their relationships and into a tale of his own magnanimity and her inevitable inadequacy. I tried to be patient, Cole continued, his voice taking on the tone of a man who'd shouldered great burdens for love. I even offered to get her a social coach, someone who could help her navigate these circles more effectively. But she took it as an insult, said she didn't want to change who she was. Lisa Chang, who'd built her tech empire from nothing and understood the challenges of breaking into elite circles, frowned. Maybe she had a point. Authenticity isn't exactly common in our world. Cole waved dismissively. Authenticity is a luxury for people who don't have shareholders, Chang. In our world, adaptation isn't just recommended, it's survival. Hannah never understood that. Webb raised his glass in a mock toast. To Hannah Carter, may she find happiness in whatever simple world she's returned to. The group joined in the toast, their laughter echoing across the marble floors. Cole felt the familiar rush of dominance, the intoxicating power of controlling a narrative and shaping perceptions. This was what he excelled at, not just in business, but in life. The ability to take any situation and bend it to his will, to emerge victorious even in defeat. Dr. Chen excused herself from the group, her discomfort finally overriding her social politeness. But Cole barely noticed. He was riding high on the combination of expensive champagne and the admiration of his peers. In his mind, he had successfully rewritten history, transforming his ex-girlfriend's departure from a stinging rejection into a predictable failure of nerve. The saddest part, Cole concluded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that drew the remaining members of his audience closer, is that she genuinely believed she belonged here. 3 years of trying to convince her otherwise, and she never quite accepted that some people are born for greatness, while others are born to serve it. The grand ballroom's conversations seemed to pause in a wave, starting from the entrance and rippling outward like disturbed water. Cole noticed the shift in energy. Before he saw its cause heads turning, whispers beginning, the subtle recalibration that occurred when true power entered a room. He turned toward the ballroom's ornate entrance, expecting to see some foreign dignitary or perhaps a surprise celebrity guest. Instead, he saw Hannah. But this wasn't the Hannah Carter he remembered, the soft-spoken woman who'd fretted over every social interaction and apologized for her very existence. This Hannah moved with liquid grace, her emerald silk gown flowing around her like she'd been born to wear it. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo that showcased the elegant line of her neck, adorned with what appeared to be genuine emeralds that caught the chandelier light. With each measured step, she was radiant in a way that seemed to draw light from the room itself. But that wasn't what made Cole's blood run cold. It was the man beside her, tall, silver-haired, and carrying himself with the kind of authority that made other powerful men step aside without conscious thought. Damien Cross. Cole's champagne glass trembled in his grip as he watched his greatest professional rival guide Hannah through the crowd with practiced ease. Damien Cross was everything Cole aspired to be, and everything he feared becoming irrelevant to older, more established, with the kind of old money confidence that couldn't be bought or faked. Their history was a complex web of business rivalries, stolen deals, and mutual professional destruction attempts that had played out across boardrooms and newspaper headlines for nearly a decade. Well, Webb muttered beside him, his voice carrying a mixture of amusement and anticipation. "Isn't that your little Hannah?" The condescension in Webb's voice, which had seemed so entertaining moments before, now grated against Cole's nerves like sandpaper. He watched as Damien introduced Hannah to a cluster of European investors, her smile warm and genuine as she engaged in what appeared to be effortless conversation. "She looks," Valentina Rossi paused, searching for the right word as she studied Hannah's transformation. Different was an understatement. The anxious, apologetic woman who'd stumbled through social interactions had been replaced by someone who seemed to belong in this rarefied atmosphere more naturally than Cole himself. As he watched, Hannah laughed at something one of the German pharmaceutical executives said, her hand resting comfortably on Damien's arm in a gesture of intimate familiarity. Richard Stoltz leaned in close to Cole, his voice dropping to a whisper. "When did this happen?" "Last I heard, Cross was still married to that Russian oil heiress. They divorced 8 months ago," Lisa Chang supplied, her tech entrepreneur's instinct for information gathering on full display. "Very quiet, very expensive, very final. Word is she kept the Moscow properties. He kept everything else." Cole's mind raced through the timeline. 8 months ago. Hannah had been gone for barely 2 months. The implications hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't just left him for some ordinary rebound relationship. She'd left him for Damien Cross, the one man in their shared professional universe who consistently outmaneuvered Cole in every arena that mattered. As if sensing his scrutiny, Damien's eyes found Cole's across the crowded room. The older man's smile was subtle and cold, acknowledging Cole's presence with the kind of nod usually reserved for defeated competitors. Then, with deliberate care, Damien's hand moved to the small of Hannah's back, a gesture of possession that was both protective and territorial. Hannah turned to follow Damien's gaze, her eyes meeting Cole's for the first time in 6 months. He expected to see embarrassment, or perhaps defiance. Instead, he saw something far worse, complete indifference. She looked at him the way she might regard a stranger at a bus stop with polite recognition, but no emotional investment whatsoever. The woman who'd once hung on his every word, who'd reorganized her entire life around his schedule and preferences, now looked at him as if he were just another face in the crowd. The realization hit Cole with stunning force. He had become irrelevant to her. "Excuse me," Cole muttered to his group, his voice rougher than intended. He needed air, space, time to process what he was seeing, but as he moved away from his audience, he caught fragments of their continuing conversation. "She looks incredible. Cross always did have impeccable taste. Wonder how long this has been going on." The words followed him as he made his way toward the bar, his mind struggling to reconcile the confident woman across the room with his carefully constructed narrative of Hannah's inevitable failure. Everything about her presence here, from her obvious comfort in the social dynamics to her choice of companion, contradicted the story he'd been telling about their relationship. Cole positioned himself at the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching the room's dynamics shift around Hannah and Damien's presence. What disturbed him most wasn't just their obvious chemistry. It was the way other guests responded to them. Senator Hayes was deep in conversation with Hannah about healthcare policy, her expression one of genuine interest rather than polite obligation. The Japanese consortium that had barely tolerated Hannah's presence during Cole's relationship was now actively seeking her input on pharmaceutical regulations in developing markets. "She's quite impressive, isn't she?" Cole turned to find Dr. Elizabeth Chen beside him, ordering a martini with the kind of precision that suggested she'd perfected the request over years of medical conferences and hospital fundraisers. I'm sorry. Cole's voice was carefully neutral. But Chen wasn't fooled. Your ex-girlfriend, Chen said, accepting her drink from the bartender. Hannah Carter. She's been discussing the ethical implications of pharmaceutical pricing in sub-Saharan Africa with the Médecins Sans Frontières representatives for the past 20 minutes. Quite sophisticated analysis, actually. Cole's grip tightened on his whiskey glass. Hannah was always interested in humanitarian causes. Interested. Chen's eyebrow arched. Mercer, she just quoted specific mortality statistics from Tanzania and suggested 3 concrete policy modifications that could reduce drug costs by 30% while maintaining patent protections. That's not interest, that's expertise. The implication hung in the air between them. Cole had spent the evening painting Hannah as naive and out of her depth, but the evidence contradicting his narrative was playing out in real time across the ballroom. He watched as Damien guided Hannah toward the auction display, their conversation with potential bidders flowing seamlessly between 3 languages. People change, Cole said finally, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. Do they? Chen's voice carried the skeptical precision of someone who'd spent decades diagnosing patients, who tried to hide their symptoms. Or do we sometimes fail to see what was always there? Before Cole could respond, Chen melted back into the crowd, leaving him alone with his whiskey and his increasingly uncomfortable thoughts. From his position at the bar, he had a clear view of the auction area, where Hannah was examining a piece of African art with the kind of focused attention she'd once reserved for his favorite meals and weekend preferences. Marcus Webb appeared at his elbow, slightly drunk and grinning with the malicious pleasure of someone who sensed drama brewing. Your little Hannah's certainly full of surprises tonight, Webb said, signaling the bartender for another champagne. Did you know she speaks Mandarin? She's been chatting with the Beijing pharmaceutical group for the past 10 minutes. Flawlessly. From what I could tell, Cole's jaw tightened. Hannah had never mentioned speaking Mandarin during their 3-year relationship. He'd conducted business in China dozens of times, always relying on translators and feeling frustrated by the communication barriers. She'd been there for several of those trips, quiet and seemingly overwhelmed by the business discussions. When did she learn that? Cole asked, hating the question even as it left his mouth. Webb's grin widened. According to Cross, she's been studying languages and international business for years. Apparently, she has a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown. Who knew? Cole felt the blood drain from his face. Georgetown was one of the most prestigious international relations programs in the country. The kind of program that required not just intelligence, but sophisticated understanding of global politics and economics. He tried to remember Hannah ever mentioning graduate school, but came up blank. Had she been studying while they were together? Had he been so absorbed in his own achievements that he'd missed something that significant? She's also apparently fluent in French and Portuguese. Webb continued, clearly enjoying Cole's discomfort. Cross says she's been consulting on pharmaceutical distribution in Francophone Africa. Very lucrative niche, from what I understand. The pieces were falling into place with humiliating clarity. Hannah hadn't been struggling to understand his business discussions, she'd been silently evaluating them. Her questions about his work, which he'd dismissed as sweet but naive curiosity, had actually been the probing inquiries of someone who understood the industry better than he'd given her credit for. Across the room, Hannah was now engaged in an animated discussion with the auction's featured artist, a renowned sculptor whose work commanded 7-figure prices. Her body language was confident and engaged, nothing like the anxious woman who'd once hidden in corners at events like this. "Excuse me," Cole muttered, abandoning his drink and pushing through the crowd toward the auction area. He needed to understand what was happening, needed to reconcile the woman he was observing with the woman he thought he'd known. As he approached, he caught fragments of Hannah's conversation with the sculptor. She was discussing the influence of traditional Yoruba artistic techniques on contemporary African sculpture, her analysis both sophisticated and passionate. The artist was nodding enthusiastically, clearly impressed by her knowledge. Hannah. Cole's voice cut through their conversation with the authority he'd once used to command her attention. She turned toward him. her expression politely curious rather than startled. "Hello, Cole. Enjoying your event?" Her tone was perfectly pleasant and completely neutral, the way she might address any acquaintance at a social gathering. There was no trace of the nervousness that had once characterized her interactions with him. No seeking of his approval or validation. "You look," Cole paused, struggling to find words that wouldn't sound either condescending or desperate. "You look wonderful." "Thank you." Hannah's smile was warm but brief. "I should rejoin Damien. We're bidding on several pieces tonight." Cole watched Hannah begin to turn away, the casual dismissal more devastating than any argument they'd ever had. The woman who'd once structured her entire life around his moods and preferences was treating him like a polite stranger, and the realization ignited something desperate and ugly in his chest. "Hannah, wait." His hand moved toward her arm, stopping just short of actual contact when Damien appeared beside them, with the fluid grace of a predator sensing threat. "Cole." Damien's voice carried the kind of authority that made other men reconsider their actions. "Enjoying your own party?" The question was perfectly polite and subtly mocking. Cole found himself caught between the desire to maintain his social composure and the overwhelming need to understand how his carefully constructed world had been so thoroughly upended. "Damien, I wasn't expecting to see you here tonight." Cole's voice was steady, but those close enough could hear the underlying tension. "Or Hannah. The pharmaceutical auction was too interesting to miss," Damien replied smoothly, his hand settling possessively on Hannah's waist. "Hannah's been educating me about the intersection of art and humanitarian aid." Fascinating perspective. Cole's eyes fixed on Hannah, searching for some trace of the woman he thought he'd known. "Since when are you interested in humanitarian aid?" The question came out more aggressively than intended, earning sharp looks from nearby guests. Hannah's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something harder passing through her eyes before settling back into polite neutrality. "I've always been interested in using resources to help people," Hannah said quietly. "I'm surprised you didn't notice." The comment was delivered without malice, but it hit Cole like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind: Hannah's volunteer work at the free clinic that he'd dismissed as playing doctor, her requests to donate to various charities that he'd brushed off as naive bleeding heart sentiment, her questions about his company's drug pricing policies that he'd treated as sweet but irrelevant curiosity. "I need to speak with you privately," Cole said, his voice dropping to a level intended only for Hannah's ears. "I don't think that's necessary," Damien interjected, his tone carrying a warning that other guests were beginning to notice. "It's all right, Damien." Hannah's voice was calm and controlled. "Cole, there's a private balcony through the French doors behind the auction display. 5 minutes. Cole felt a surge of something that might have been hope or might have been simple relief. Hannah was willing to talk to him, to give him a chance to understand what had happened and maybe, if he was honest enough or persuasive enough, to begin repairing the damage he was only now beginning to comprehend. The private balcony overlooked the city's glittering skyline, the sounds of the party muted by thick glass and ornate curtains. Hannah stood near the railing, her emerald dress catching the moonlight in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. For a moment, Cole was reminded of the woman he'd fallen for years ago, before success and ego had convinced him that love was just another commodity to be managed. "You look incredible," Cole said, moving closer but maintaining careful distance. "Really, Hannah, I hardly recognized you." "People change, Cole." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Or maybe they just stop hiding who they really are." The comment stung because it carried the ring of truth. Cole tried to remember when Hannah had stopped sharing her thoughts and opinions with him, when their conversations had shifted from genuine exchange to his monologues and her careful agreement. "I've been thinking about us," Cole said, abandoning subtlety, "about what went wrong. Maybe I wasn't as attentive as I should have been." Hannah turned to face him fully, and for the first time since her arrival, he saw genuine emotion in her expression. But it wasn't the longing or residual affection he'd hoped for. It was something closer to pity. "Cole, do you remember the night I told you about my graduate program at Georgetown?" The question caught him off guard. When was that?" "It was our 6-month anniversary. We were at that little Italian restaurant you liked, and I was so excited to tell you that I'd been accepted into their International Relations Masters program. I'd been working toward it for 2 years. Cole searched his memory, but could only recall a vague impression of Hannah talking too much. During what should have been a romantic dinner, he'd been distracted by a potential merger that was dominating his thoughts, barely listening to what she was saying. You smiled and nodded, and then spent the rest of the dinner telling me about your quarterly projections, Hannah continued, her voice gentle but relentless. When I graduated summa cum laude 2 years later, you didn't even remember that I'd been in school. The accusation hung between them like a bridge Cole wasn't sure he could cross. He wanted to deny it, to defend himself, but the memory was there now, Hannah in her cap and gown, asking if he was proud of her. His distracted congratulations before launching into a story about his latest business. Triumph. Hannah, I do. You remember what you said when I told you I wanted to volunteer with Doctors Without Borders? Cole's throat felt tight. He remembered that conversation more clearly, Hannah's earnest explanation of wanting to use her education to help people. His dismissive response about playing in the dirt with people who couldn't pay for real medical care. You called it poverty tourism, Hannah said quietly. Said I was too naive to understand how the real world works. That if I wanted to help people, I should focus on supporting your business success instead of chasing romantic fantasies. Each word was a small, precise wound, not delivered with malice, but with the clarity of someone who had moved beyond anger into simple truth-telling. The night I left, Hannah continued, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was saying, wasn't really about finding you with Rebecca in your office. That was just the final confirmation of what I'd already realized. Cole flinched at the mention of his affair, the one aspect of their relationships and that his carefully crafted narrative had conveniently omitted Rebecca from marketing. Ambitious and sharp-edged in all the ways Hannah wasn't, had been an ego boost more than a genuine connection. Hannah, that was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless. It wasn't meaningless, Cole. Hannah's interruption was gentle but firm. It was inevitable. You needed someone who reflected your image of yourself back to you. Someone who fit the story you were telling about your life. I was never going to be that person. The truth of it settled over Cole like cold water. Rebecca had been impressive at company events, aggressive in board meetings, ruthless in her ambitions. She'd been everything he'd tried to make Hannah become, and everything Hannah had quietly refused to be. But you've become exactly that person, Cole said, gesturing toward the ballroom where the party continued without them. Tonight, watching you in there, you're everything I always said you could be. Hannah smiled, and for the first time all evening, there was warmth in the expression. But it wasn't directed at him. No, Cole, I'm everything I always was. The difference is that Damien sees it. The simplicity of the statement was devastating. Cole thought about all the times he'd tried to improve Hannah's social coaching, wardrobe suggestions, instructions on how to network more effectively. He'd been trying to transform her into something she already was, if he'd bothered to pay attention. When did you start seeing him? Cole asked, though he dreaded the answer. We met at a pharmaceutical ethics conference in Geneva, about 4 months before I left you. Hannah's honesty was brutal in its gentleness. I was there presenting my thesis research on drug accessibility in developing nations. Damien was keynoting about corporate responsibility in global health initiatives. Cole closed his eyes, remembering that trip. He'd been annoyed that Hannah had insisted on attending what he'd called a bunch of do-gooders, complaining about profit margins. She'd gone alone while he'd stayed in New York to close a deal that had ultimately fallen through anyway. He listened to me, Hannah continued. Really listened, asked questions about my work, my ideas, my goals. Not because he was humoring me, but because he was genuinely interested in what I thought. And you've been together since then? No. Hannah shook her head. I didn't leave you for Damien. Cole, I left you for me. Damien and I reconnected after his divorce was finalized. But that's not why I ended things with you. Through the French doors, Cole could see the party continuing. His guests networking and deal-making while his carefully constructed world crumbled on a private balcony. Senator Hayes was deep in conversation with Damien, probably discussing policy initiatives that Hannah had influenced. The Japanese consortium was bidding aggressively on several auction pieces, perhaps inspired by Hannah's earlier conversations about art and humanitarian aid. "I built my entire company," Cole said quietly, the words coming from some deep, honest place he rarely accessed. "I thought I could build a relationship the same way, identify the weaknesses, implement improvements, optimize for success. People aren't businesses, Cole," Hannah replied. "Love isn't a merger. You can't acquire someone's heart by identifying their market value and making a strategic offer." The observation was devastating in its accuracy. Cole had approached their relationship like every other challenge in his life, with the assumption that success came through domination, improvement, and control. He'd never considered that love might require seeing someone exactly as they were and choosing to cherish that person rather than trying to optimize them. "What happens now?" Cole asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Now you go back to your party and continue being exactly who you are," Hannah said. "And I continue being exactly who I am, just not together." She moved toward the French doors, pausing just before re-entering the ballroom. "For what it's worth, Cole, I hope you find someone who makes you want to be a better man, not because they need fixing, but because they inspire growth." Cole remained on the balcony as Hannah rejoined the party, watching through the glass as Damien welcomed her back with the kind of smile Cole realized he'd never given her, one of pure happiness at her presence, uncomplicated by judgment or the desire for improvement. The party continued around his absence, guests networking and deal-making as if the host's personal crisis was merely background noise to their own ambitions. Senator Hayes was now laughing at something Damien had said, while Hannah engaged the Japanese consortium in what appeared to be a spirited discussion about international trade policy. Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Webb. "Where are you? The Germans want to discuss that biotech acquisition." He stared at the message, realizing that his absence from his own party had gone largely unnoticed. The guests were here for the networking opportunities and potential deals, not for him personally. They would have the same conversations, make the same connections, bid on the same auction pieces whether he was present or not. Through the glass, Cole watched Hannah and Damien make their rounds, their presence adding an energy to the room that his own hosting had failed to generate. They weren't just attending the party, they were elevating it, bringing out the best in other guests through their genuine interest and sophisticated engagement. As the evening wound down, Cole finally rejoined the party, moving through the motions of thanking guests and confirming follow-up meetings. But his attention kept drifting to Hannah and Damien, noting the easy way they complemented each other, the respect evident in how Damien introduced Hannah to potential business contacts, the pride in Hannah's expression when Damien discussed his company's humanitarian initiatives. They left together just after midnight, Hannah pausing at the ballroom entrance to thank Cole for including them in the event. Her courtesy was impeccable and completely impersonal, the kind of polite acknowledgement one might give any gracious host. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said, offering her hand for a brief, professional handshake. The auction was very successful. Cole took her hand, noting the absence of any emotional charge in the contact. Her fingers were steady and cool, adorned with an engagement ring he'd somehow failed to notice earlier in the evening. "Congratulations," he said quietly, nodding toward the ring. Hannah's smile was radiant. "Thank you. We're very happy." And then they were gone, leaving Cole alone with the catering staff and the echoing silence of his suddenly empty ballroom. He stood among the remnants of his perfect party, abandoned champagne glasses, wilted flowers, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume, and realized that he'd spent the entire evening trying to diminish someone who had ultimately made his event more successful simply by being present. The woman he'd painted as naive and inadequate had commanded respect from every guest she'd encountered. The relationship he'd reframed as his charitable patience with her limitations had actually been her generous tolerance of his blindness to her worth. Cole Mercer had built an empire by identifying value and acquiring it, but he'd lost the most valuable thing in his life by failing to recognize what he already possessed. What do you think was Cole's treatment of Hannah a reflection of his character flaws? Or do you believe some people simply aren't compatible regardless of love? Should Hannah have tried harder to make Cole see her worth? Or was she right to prioritize finding someone who valued her from the start?